Khalil Gibran once said, "Out of suffering have emerged the strongest souls. The most massive characters are seared with scars." The Vulnerable Power Show is a deep dive into the heart of leadership. Hear raw insights and wisdom from experienced leaders who transformed during their dark night of the soul journey, now bringing light to the world. Spotlighting heart-centered leaders that have transformed, stepping into their fullest light and mission. Learn how you, too, can weather life's storm and thrive. What are the keys for successful personal growth and life-changing transformation? It is my intention to bring you wisdom, empowerment, hope, and inspiration, so you too can ascend to your fullest light as a leader, to bring about impact for the collective good. Greetings, everybody, and welcome back for another edition of the Vulnerable Power Show, a deep dive into the heart of colorful leadership today with a soul sister, Kate Griffiths. And before I say hello to her, today I wanted to take a unique spin. I was inspired to share two things in terms of how, as I always introduce the guests, how I meet them. I was inspired to share two contextual points today. And before I do that, as always, we're here today with the intention to show you the inside perspective of transformation in a leader's perspective, with the intention of inspiring you, the listener, that you can do it, providing hope that there is a proverbial light at the end of that tunnel. And while there's a huge transformational shift going, we believe that the future, and fourthly, is heart-centered leadership. So the two contextual points today. One, there was a famous study about crossword puzzles around the world that kind of proved that we are all really interconnected and entangled. So one of the ways that Kate and I actually met through LinkedIn was we had literally converged upon similar verbiage, similar styles. And, you know, I believe that some of us are more entangled than others. Some of us are almost like soul siblings or soul tribes, so to speak. And that's one thing that was key for Kate and I. Now, secondly, the more vulnerable part. During our initial one-on-one, and she can speak to this in a moment, we both triggered the heaven out of each other. And what I really wanted to say on the second point is confess really one of my learnings from this experience of how I used to be very quick to react and not really hold or have the capacity or lack the capacity, which some of you who have seen the first episode of the launch of this show may have heard my story, which was one of the experiences that I really learned from my brother's passing. So today, I wanted to kind of start off as that's how I met Kate. And I had a very unique opportunity and lesson that emerged about how to hold capacity as a leader, how to sit with emotions, how to hold those emotions. And Kate and I both really like Rumi, and it's kind of like that Rumi poem. And I wanted to start off with that, with the guest house, how every day we can have new emotions, new feelings, new upheavals that come in, and it's our choice, our personal responsibility as to how we relate to those guests, as Rumi calls it, that enter us. Because as Rumi says, they are sent from the divine as a gift, and it's how we relate to each one of them and how they show up. So without further ado, because I've been blabbering on, Kate, how are you today? You lovely, lovely, colorful woman, you.
I am feeling great, Hass, and what a wonderful way to start. You're making me laugh already.
There's gonna be plenty of that. So what's your perspective on, before we dive into your experience and transformation as a leader, what's your perspective on that, if you have anything, if it resonates, on how we met and kind of that funny, you know, initial couple of one-on-ones we had?
No, it was great. So we had this conversation and I was really looking forward to it. And then I can't remember the detail now, But I remember you saying in your really sort of eager dog-like way, oh, I think we should collaborate. And I was thinking, yeah, when hell freezes over, maybe. So that was sort of where I was. And so I did my typically British, being polite and yeah, okay, like, let's meet for lunch sometime sort of scenario. And thought, well, you never know what you're going to get in a meeting. And then I don't really remember the next time because it was a few months later, but it was a completely different experience. And that was the start of the magic, really.
It's like you had selective amnesia, right? It was these are not the droids you were looking for. No, I appreciate that sentiment. So Kate, why don't you start off wherever you want to start in terms of your transformational journey, your metamorphosis into where you're at from corporate. I believe you started with PricewaterhouseCoopers and did other strategic leadership work in the corporate and facilitative space. So why don't you start wherever you feel you want to start, and the proverbial talking stick is yours.
Oh, wow. Thanks, Hass. Feel free to jump in anytime. And so there's sort of like I feel, so I don't really subscribe to the dark night of the soul thing. Like one thing happens and then it's all brilliant after that and it's all sorted. That's not my experience. So there were lots of little things. So I'll just pick out a few. When I was about 11, my parents sent me to a outward bound style camp. And when I was a kid, I hated sport. I was cat-handed was the phrase, throw me a ball, I'd probably drop it, So I ended up in this thing and we had to go and paddle down to the sea, which was freezing, even though it was Hong Kong, with jellyfish in it. And it was like 6 a.m. and it's like, no, just get on with it. And, sort of, all that kind of stuff. Anyway, so I was like, this is misery on a stick. And ended up, we had canoeing and we ended up going and camping on some island somewhere. And then I can't remember what this topic was, but I remember talking to everybody and getting onto my soapbox, and off I went. And they called me the preacher. Now, at the time, I thought that was a bit weird, and I didn't really think anything of it. But it was a start of the journey. Not at the time, I just remember thinking this is grim. And I think that's the other thing, is that sometimes our experience, we understand it later, other pieces of the puzzle come in. And so lots of other things happened. And I was actually started my life working in a university because I really believe in culture and communications. I spoke Spanish fluently, had a reasonable amount of French and other bits and pieces of language. So I was the youngest director of European liaisons, 23. And it was a few years after that. And I don't know how I got it, but I was given, the book, The Celestine Prophecy. I started reading that book and I was like, wow, this is amazing. And I couldn't put the book down. So I read it all night. And it was like a portal for me, Hass, because I got this one, right, this is me. This is what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be doing this kind of work that he's talking about. I didn't have really a word for it. I didn't even know what a coach was then, or a facilitator, or a healer, really. I was just like, this is it, or how I was going to get there. I just had this knowingness inside me. So that was kind of the next piece of the puzzle, if you like. And then it is often where I think the dark night of the soul piece works or has some resonance is it's often when we're in a deal of discomfort or pain that we get these insights. So kind of the next one was I'd been married for probably I think a year and a bit, and my husband got called up to Iraq. And he had to go, and it was after the war had finished, and there was actually more mortar bombs in that year. And there were key times, like, for example, our wedding anniversary, said he was going to call, and then he couldn't call because someone had been killed, but he couldn't even get that out because they had to contact the family. And so there was some really horrendous times. And I remember thinking, there's got to be more to life than this. And I ended up wandering into a crystal shop, and I don't know what this weird stuff was, and had a few conversations, and then I did Reiki, because I met someone who was doing that, and I thought, yeah, this could be it. And I remember learning about meditation and thinking, what is this rubbish? I mean, we'd meet every week, and these people come back and they go, well, I've been, here, and this happened, and oh God, I missed it. I'm staring at the damn candle and nothing bloody happened. So I was a little bit fraught and trying. And so I continued, and a year later I did Reiki 2. And I was drawn to Reiki because on my honeymoon, I was in the Amazon rainforest, and it was one of these eco lodges, so we were getting to know the local native tribe and so on. And this guy, I don't know who he was, said, oh, would you like a Reiki session? I was like, oh, what's that? Oh, it's, some energy thing. I was like, oh, that sounds interesting. So I laid there, he did a session. I was like, oh, that was nice, and he wouldn't let me pay him or what have you. So I'd sort of had this experience in 2002. So then we hopped on to 2004. And so it started to build, I think. And what I found, though, is what's really interesting is if you're not paying attention, the universe is really great. It gives you like little gentle nudges going, hello, I'm here, whatever. But if you continue to ignore it, and I'm pretty strong-willed, as you know, so
oh, you
so sometimes I was like, well, whatever. So then there would be this massive almighty shitness, really, for want of a awful stuff happening. So I thought it was brilliant. So what had happened was I became a coach because I'd found myself coaching my boss without really understanding what I was doing. And so when I was on maternity leave, I got the qualification because I thought I just need to have a model, and I need to know what I'm doing, because I don't want anyone to be put in a worse place as a result of anything I've said or done. So that was really important to me. So I did this, and obviously learned loads through the experience of doing the coaching qualification. And then I was like setting up my own business the first time. So this was back in 2008. But I was terrified because I was still at the beginning, really, in many respects of my spiritual journey. So it's like, well, how am I going to make money? Will it work? And then because I'd been into, I was by this stage almost 40. So I'd always had a salaried job, always been paid every month. And I was like, well, how does this work? So some months I'd get thousands, some months I'd get 200 or 300, and some months I get nothing. So it was a real sort of mixed bag. And I was like, and I felt so disconcerted by that. I didn't enjoy it. And so then I was running a conference for coaches, and I met someone I knew from PwC who said, oh, you're coming back? And I said, went like this, I've got to get my hand. No, because I was like, there's no one I want to go back there. And then another part of me said, well, look, it's silly. Why don't you just go along, meet people, because it's a free opportunity to meet, to network and see where it takes you. So anyway, so I did that. And one of the guys I really liked, and I went back, and it was great. It was very cathartic because I went to a more internal role. So I was running L&D for the consulting practice, and so putting a lot, doing the whole induction process and various other things. So it's all really good. And then I ended up doing another role, which was to be part of Genesis Part, which was at that time their flagship leadership development program for the top 50 directors globally. So I go over to Warsaw with my 2 5-year-old and 4-year-old and an au pair to help me with them. And I'm sort of coaching, facilitating groups of people. But it was a bit like, do you know the film, The Devil's Advocate?
I love that movie. I feel like I'm both Keanu Reeves and Al Pacino in one.
Right. Okay. So you know the story. So you remember the wife gets terrorized by these Zimmerites because they're basically not real.
Yeah.
But he's so enamored by the opportunities as he perceives it, he doesn't see it and thinks she's going mad. So I was a bit like that wife, because these women were like awful, and I couldn't believe it, because I was like, we're all in leadership development, surely we're really developed and we're more aware than anyone else. But actually it was more more of a, sort of
Hope
snake.
so. You would hope so, right? Yeah.
Yeah, but it was.
Leadership coaches would be embodied leaders themselves. Alas, yeah.
Sadly, it was quite something else. So and then basically I ended up in a women's hospital because I was bleeding, and I lost a baby, and they started yelling at me and calling me all sorts of names because obviously Poland is a Catholic country, and they, had all sorts of issues around that. And you're going to have a hysterectomy. And they were saying it that loud. Well, imagine shouting it. And my mum's on the other end of the telephone. And I'm thinking, shit, I'm trying to kind of get this through my head. And I'm trying to wonder what my mum's making of all this. And I was like,
And these are
whoa.
the doctors in the facility?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
this is funny because we're going to have another soul sister in a few episodes, Jennifer, who's a healthcare leader. So this is perfect preview. So yeah, doctors and bedside manner. Keep going. So they're yelling at you while you're in the hospital bed?
Yeah, right. And I'm bleeding and in pain, and I'm trying to work out how to help my mum process what's happened and myself.
Wow.
Then my husband's like, well, surely that PwC can fly me out there. Oh, I don't want to be any trouble. And he's like, just tell them what's happening. Anyway, I did get him out there so he could be with me because I had to have an operation. And I just realized in that moment, you know what? I'm not meant to be here. And although I had at that time this intention, I could make PwC this really spiritual place. I'd brought in the first women's network to the organisation. I'd set up the diversity consulting practice for the public sector. So I'd done some really big things. So I was like, oh, spirituality, that's no big thing. I'm like, whoa, this isn't mine to do. So then, within about a 6-month period after that, I manifested a redundancy package. So that was my safety blanket, really. I was like, if anything goes wrong, I can tap into that money, so I don't need to worry. So that's, I felt very grateful to the divine that I'd been given that. It was kind of like, no, you can do this. So then I took 6 months off. So I guess that was the nearest to the kind of dark night of the soul territory, because when I left, I had boils on my hands.
Well, let's slow down here because you read my mind, because I was going to ask you to go back, and then you mentioned another symptom. Do you feel now the boils, pause there, and the physical symptoms that you manifested that unfortunately led to the loss of the child and that dis-ease or illness, where do you feel now in hindsight was the cause of that, and in terms of your struggles and the metaphysics of it for the leaders from your own perspective, for the audience's sake, like the boils and the symptoms?
Yeah, so I think for me, it was a wake-up call. It was like, well, you can stay in this organization, but this isn't, we've tried to tell you nicely, you're not meant to be here. And as you're not listening to us, we're going to later on, so think lots of other things. I mean, at that time, they moved all my stuff out of my flat and put it in this other place. They told me I couldn't go back to collect all my stuff. And I put my foot down and said, I am coming back. And, and so there were all sorts of, I mean, I've really, obviously shortened it because of the length of time.
I understand.
But a lot of terror and a lot of trying to control, and to some extent they were successful, in other ways, they weren't. And I kind of got to that point. But of course, because we all have actually guardian angels, whether we are aware of it or not. And when I'd first gone back 2 years previously, I got on really well with this HR person who then helped facilitate my exit because they knew what I was capable of. But all of these things are there, I mean, there's the logical. And then, even then, I mean, I was practicing some different things to keep my energy clean and to protect myself because I was aware of the toxicity of the environment. Even so, it was such a massive thing, that's when I ended up, it was basically stress-based eczema that looked like boils. And it is due to the worry and, because I had I knew I was going to do coaching, probably work, but I didn't know what it would look like. All I had was my previous experience, which hadn't really done it for me. So I was like, but I knew I had to go. So I took 6 months off. I spent that with my beautiful girls who, therapy in themselves really. And thought, and then I set out in the September of that year and I was like, well, I'm not going to do anything unless it's fun. That was my one rule. It has to be fun.
Yeah, I remember you told me that when we first connected, and I share that resonance.
And so that's my kind of been my motto really. And then, lots of things happened. I won't go into the sort of the story because that's a bit tedious, well, not tedious, but it's just story.
One sec. What does fun mean? So when you say, so from Kate's perspective, when you say it has to be fun, what are the elements, if you were to describe them for the audience, of what that criterion looks like for you? Because I describe it as play or co-creation. And so for the audience's sake, what does that mean in terms of your work has to be fun?
I know, see, and that's really interesting that I want to pick up the word co-creation. Because when I first came out that second time, I was like, oh yeah, I was looking for people to co-create with because I wasn't strong enough on my own. And so I got taken for a ride. So I ended up supporting a much more well-known coach at the time, and for a year, who'd written a book, which was really, it was, I totally believe in the book. And then we developed a program together, and then literally just as it was going to start making money, she said she didn't want to work with me anymore. And because it was her book, obviously she owned more of the IP and stuff like that. But you know what I'm like as a Taurus rooster. So I was like, well, that's fine, but you owe me for all the work I've done for you for the last year. And so she said some very vitriolic emails. And ultimately, I did get paid, because I was like, if necessary, I will take legal action because I'm not prepared to be, walked all over. And the learning for me, I guess, and it's not directly about the fun in itself, is it's actually really hard to have a successful collaboration with somebody if you're not in your own power. So I feel now, and obviously it's easy, and I may feel differently in 5 years' time, but as I look back now, I'm now collaborating in a way that I've never collaborated, and yet before, and yet all of that was the necessary part of the tapestry, if you will, to get me to this place. If I hadn't had those experiences, I couldn't do it the way I do it now, if that makes sense. So I had a whole load of other ones that didn't work. And then, as you know, I worked with a business partner for about 5 or 6 years, which was amazing overall. So but even with that, even when I look back at that, that ended in March 2019. And I went through, COVID for me, and I don't mean any disrespect to anyone out there who's struggling, but for me, it's been a breeze because I had another really tough year last year because I lost my best friend and I lost my source of income. I lost my business. And so, and I turned 50. So there's all these celebrations, which were fun. And so I had lots of fun and lots of pain and grief and, processing and letting go and saying, well, I can't see the future, and I need to trust, I need to have faith that it is going to be better. But obviously for a while it didn't feel that way. And what I think the juice or the gift of all of that pain, because as we know, if we can be with it, underneath there is some real gems to be found. And for me, it was that actually, even in that relationship where I felt we were equal and, we were really connected and all of that good stuff, it wasn't equal. There was a degree of codependency largely on my part, and I was giving away my power. And that was in part in nature because of the way the two of us had met and the relationship we'd had and how that had evolved. And I'm like, oh, right. Oh, that was what was going on. But when you're in it, you can't see it. So we sort of gone over loads of things, but
No, I have a lot of questions, so don't worry. We're gonna ping through a few. So thank you for getting into the details. So a couple of things that come forward, because it's remarkable, because I feel like you touched upon something that came up for us in terms of going with the flow, allowing a dynamic to unfold on its own versus kind of in driving it as well. So I echo your sentiment, because as you know, we've shared a lot about that. So this dovetails for the question I had, because as you know, my past was a lot of partnership disputes as a lawyer, barrister, solicitor, what you all call it over there across the pond. So what do you feel, other than, and I liked a couple of the points that came forward as you spoke, right? The speaking your truth, both with PricewaterhouseCoopers and that experience, and your husband saying, tell them, and, mustering the courageous communication to speak your truth, which you also alluded to in the partnership, I guess you could call it resolution process. And then second, what I heard from you, and I wanted to see if there's anything else you could share, is you're spot on, is this notion of the power, right? The codependency, the power dynamics, and giving our power away or asking for a partner when we're not comfortable ourselves, and having the wholeness. And I think Eric Fromm says it in The Art of Loving, right? He goes something along the lines of, you have to be like two independent islands with a bridge between them. So there's interdependence. And I know for the audience, that's a lot of what you and I had, right? It was a stop and go. And I'm grateful that the hiccups, as I would advise people, are upfront. You do that proactive stuff up front. You see the unseen and that those wrinkles. So other than those things that I'm kind of paraphrasing and that I feel you are extrapolating from what you said, what else do you feel were successful? Because that's a very perilous territory, right? I don't want to take legal action because I sense you're like me, is taking that higher road. And then, so what is that? How did that dance work for you? And what else can you share with the audience in terms of not wanting to go litigious, and then really saying, hey, work with me, and that party doesn't want to work with you? Because that's always the dance, is leveraging versus, asking, so to speak.
Well, I think it's really interesting, and this is not answering the question directly.
Yeah, it doesn't matter, whatever comes
and
through.
at the same time, it's sort of through an analogy.
Sure.
So I've been talking to a few people recently who've ended up, aren't very clear on their boundaries. So people have taken the P, or wanted some free time, or whatever it was. The detail is almost irrelevant. And I was like, I don't have that anymore. And it's because it's an energy inside you. Like, nobody takes advantage of me in that way now. They know that, if they want to work with me, this is what it costs, and this is the process, and there's no kind of questioning of that or bartering. Whereas before I was in my power, people, would you do a session, or will you do that? And it's like, no, if I want to do what you're offering, because that's going to help me, then sure, I'll pay you, your rate. And I don't know, it's that, and it's sort of like, so with the other thing is, and I wouldn't say I did it necessarily successfully, because I was really affected at the time by the words that they were using and what they called me and things like that. And yet there's a tenacity about me as a Taurus, that's like, I'm like the dog with the bone. I'm not letting this go.
Strong like bull.
Yeah, don't mess with the bull. And so, there's that part as well. And it's funny because I think it's linked to, sort of some of the conversations you and I have had together, and also with Mel. I have a really strong divine will, so very much, as you know, a masculine female. And so the counter to that is a deep sensitivity. So I can be very clear about what I want, and I can also get very hurt. And people don't always, they see one or other. Very few people see the whole package. And it's designed that way, or that's the way I am. Because obviously, if I had just had that masculine power, it probably could be very destructive in terms of how it's used. And actually, that has been the journey. And it's one of the things I'm incredibly grateful to my, long-term business partner, Kath, for, because she very much, in many respects, represented what I would call the divine feminine, very soft, very subtle. And I remember saying to her, look, I'm a bit of a pleb, really. You're going to have to spell it out for me because I don't get the nuances, love, And so it was a bit uncomfortable for her that she had to be a little bit more direct. And sometimes, that wasn't her natural style. But what I learned from her was this ability to soften the message. And so it's been really interesting in our interactions, for example. It's like, oh, so I got all of that, so I can now pass some of that slow down and the pace thing to you, because that's what I learned. Partially, in terms of communication, I learned that from Kath. And then, as you know, for about a year, I was part of a marketing group. And that whole thing was where I came, which I know, talking to a Persian is probably, a bit like, going to Mecca or whatever, but the 99 divine qualities. So it's where I learned what mine was, which is as-sabor, which is,
you mean the 99 games of God. So the Sufi Islamic tradition, for those listening that are unfamiliar.
Sorry.
9 qualities or attributes are also 99 names of God. I believe they have something similar in the Hebrew Talmudic tradition or Kabbalah tradition. Yeah.
That's it. So with that, so this marketing thing wasn't pure marketing. It was also quite spiritual. And so you were encouraged to kind of do what they called remembrance, which was connecting to your heart and doing those wonderful things. And that you could find your own jewel, which was your gift, which was the night. And I remember when I started, what is this rhubarb, and I couldn't get into it, but I kept trying, trying. And it was really weird because I think I was in a session with a group. So you have the group transmission, so the energy is much more powerful when there's a group of people collected. And I got this, I'm sure it was a loud voice in my head, the Claire audio, whatever, sort of saying as-sabor. And I was just like, woke up. I was like, what? And I was like, I'm not that, And it's so funny because I was thinking it meant patience, really. And I can be one of the most, I'm much more patient these days, but I would say there are many, many people that are way more patient than I am. So I'm like, that can't be right. But it actually also means perseverance. And I have, there's nobody that can beat me on perseverance. It's the tenacity piece. And I was like, oh, this is really interesting because what I learned through that process, and I think it's relevant for all leaders, is often within our greatest strength is our greatest weakness. But because it's in the blind spot, you don't see it because you know what the gift is, because so many people have told you, you've seen it yourself and so on. My family always used to refer to me when I was younger as the plodder. So for years, I didn't think I was particularly intelligent, to be honest. Oh, Kate, she's just a good old plodder, puts the work in. And, it's that quality of perseverance, essentially. And yet absolutely zero patience, which has grown a little, it's like any muscle, you can build it. And this is the point with the jewel is the thing that you need the most is also what you give to people as well, almost. It's, do you know what I'm talking about? And so this relates to, if we're talking about, leadership, it's like, yes, here's what you're really good at. And right next to it is what you're really shit at. And they're almost like two sides of the coin, if you will. And that's why people so often miss it, because they can see what they're really good at, or they see what they're bad at, but they don't see the interrelationship between the two.
I love that. So there's so much there. There's so much there because I want to go through a little bit of that. And I it's that healer, that last part for me lands as healer, heal thyself, right? Oftentimes we're dispensing. And as you said earlier, if we're attracting an energy vampire or somebody that's taking from us, it's because we're giving it from within. Or there's a parable, I think it's a Turkish parable from Mullah Nasruddin. If you get on all fours and somebody rides you like a donkey, it's equally your fault. And then, it's wasab, right? The verse is wasab, innal insana lafi khusr, because it takes me back to the beginning, because I hear patience, I hear capacity, I hear tolerance, the perseverance to hold, the perseverance to allow the guest house, to allow it in, and then to hold, persevere, and like you said, slow down the communication. It's key, in addition to what else we've said, to extrapolate that slowing it down to make sure you have a patient communication with somebody that's going to be prospectively a business partner or a co-creator or collaborator. So there's a lot of stuff there. I wanted to ask you something. So there's so much, and I'm not taking as many notes as I normally do. So you said the greatest strength, also that reminds me of the greatest strength has your biggest blind spot of the gene keys that I've learned so much from our group and from Richard when we talk. And in this concept, correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm newer to the vernacular, is like the Sidhi or the gift, right? Our gifts are often in reverse, converse, hidden in the blind spot. And as you alluded to very brilliantly, then you have the gift, you also have the weakness next to it. So you have to be mindful of that duality of, what am I projecting onto the people around me? What am I not owning? Again, personal responsibility, I find, is key in what you're saying and what you're doing. One quick question. I want to go back to the very beginning of you saying that, because for us, well, two things. Before I ask the question, I remembered one other point that came forward was this, the victim bottle, right? In your color, which we'll talk more about in a few moments, because there was this, from my perspective, the duality.
Can you see it? See that red and purple bottle?
Can you put your finger kind of under it from there so people can see it, like in the camera? Can you like kind of hold your finger?
Right,
it's that guy right there, guys. So that, in the corner. So for me, it was interesting to see us triggering one another. And that was a big learning for me, as I saw, given where I'm at in my evolution, that you were showing me when I got triggered, when I finally sat with it, the victim within me. And of course, the session we worked on with you, or you worked on me, I should say, was obviously that. And I know I did the color thing, which we'll talk about in a few moments. Where do you feel, and this is the question, where do you feel in this dance? Because I had somebody comment on a post recently saying, oh, good, what kind of holistic is this? You're charging for spirituality? And it's like, well, wait a minute here. So no, it didn't alarm me. I was actually okay. I had a private conversation with this person, because again, as sabur, I'm learning that capacity. This isn't about me. What's really being shown here? I'm curious with you. This is a question I wanted to play with you on, is where do you see that line? Not bartering per se, in terms of service, right? How do you play with that parameter now that you are in your authentic power of this notion of, okay, I want to gift it, or barter may not be the word that reasontes for you, versus I have to charge. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
So it's not about have to. I kind of sort of think, so as you know, I have as my, I mean, I loathe this term, but in marketing speak, my entry level product is my meditations, and I do a series and then give them all a different name. So at the moment, it's stillness is the access point to your essence, and that's 10 meditations. People can pay for the series, or they can just experience one and come back to another, or never come back. And it's pay from the heart. So the whole, it's like the Dana concept, really. You can pay anything. You can pay £5, you can pay 150 quid, whatever. And I put parameters around it. So, what works for me and my business, what would be really great. And also I trust you that you're paying what you can afford. And so for me, that is totally affordable to anybody. And then, so that's one level. Then it's like, I kind of also feel like people that have really put in and said, right, I want to do this and I want to do that, I'll often gift them something back, because I'm sort of like, well, I'm really grateful because you've, you know, effectively you're helping my cash flow, but you've bought in, you know. So with the meditations, for example, if somebody, you know, so somebody recently became a one-to-one client and they joined the Sangha that I've just set up, and I gifted them a free entry into my meditation, because I go, well, actually you're paying a lot and I want to be able to give you something back. And also I'll look at, you know, I had somebody come to me who's earning peanuts, you know, I don't know what they're earning. And I said, and I, initially they said they wanted to work with me, and then I sent them a contract and they said, oh, that'd be really tight. Can I don't only want to sign up for a few sessions, you know, for fewer sessions. And I said, look, if we do it at this rate instead, which is my old rate, would you be prepared to sign up for the 6? Because I think you need at least 6. Oh yeah, I can do that then. So I kind of, what I've said, a roundabout way of saying is I do it intuitively, largely. And the other piece is that I also, like, for example, recently I took on a pro bono client because they can't afford to pay me. And I've been doing really quite well recently. And I feel it's about tithing back, you know. So it's not a explicit, like when you belong to a church and you give your 10%, but it's the same principle. Well, actually, you know, it's that quote, if you like, to those who much has been given, much is expected. And it's like, you know, I'm only here because I've been gifted these gifts by the divine through me, you know, so I don't own them. Equally, we currently live in a society that's run on money, and actually people value things more if they've had to pay for it. And whether that's right or wrong is not up for debate, really. And also, you know, I'm part of a family, I have bills to pay, etc. So there's something, I kind of don't have hard and fast rules. I mean, you know, pretty much everyone pays the same by and large. And then there's these few, not anomalies, but different things that I choose to do.
I like that, because you said the key word, right? It's intuitive, and the intuition oftentimes is dynamic, it's fluid. And I feel like a lot of what is being tasked of the new paradigm of leaders is to play in an arena of pushing the envelope and seeing what new forms can be brought in terms of business models, ways, and I guess you could say philosophies, methodologies, or perspectives to business. Because, you know, as you know, we've talked about this in terms of how my sibling and you are a lot alike, because you're a year apart, and actually on that spectrum of the zodiac to Aries and Taurus. And it's interesting for me because it's been a part even before I became woke, or whatever you want to call it, before my transformation got deeper. Even as a lawyer, when I was full-time as a lawyer only, it was something I grappled with, because I agree with you. We have to work within the existing system, and it's a delicate dance, as Buckminster Fuller and Socrates and some others have said, is you also want to create the new system, and then move, obviously, the collective energies to that system. So I've always, I guess, been fascinated by that dance of meeting people where they're at, and then also leading them to this new model. So I like your approach to it, because it's you can't, like you said, you can't have hard and fast rules. You can't be rigid, and that's beautifully phrased. So thank you for elaborating on that in terms of your business model and the intuitive pricing and heart-based donation. I think it fits very well with what we're discussing here. And the other thing, before we kind of continue on with the conversation, was, you know, earlier what I found remarkable, and it's very fitting of your branding. You know, we are the medicine. We are the essence of what we're doing. And I think you really danced around being a whole, right? Being whole, all parts, being whole, reclaiming our power. And I know that's your branding. It's whole self leadership, which was funny because when we met, that goes back to the crossword puzzle analogy at the intro, everybody, because I was seeing these things and going, blimey, you know, we call it synchronicity, or, you know, entanglement, where we start to see the convergences. And that for me is remarkable, because you're embodying that. You're embodying being a whole leader, you know, having all of yourself in the space. The money has to be part of that conversation. We can't neglect, and especially in the spiritual space, as you know. So
what this leads me, if there's anything else on the transformation, because I sense there's been a lot of the learnings. So I really wanted to get to the color alchemy. I know you don't call it that. I love the word alchemy. Anytime the Persian can go alchemy, hey, So color alchemy, if you're comfortable with transitioning.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Yeah.
What's all these bottles filled with water and oils, you kooky lady? Why are you telling me to get them? No, so everybody knows I've experienced her craft. I love her and have deep respect for her as a colleague, as a soul sister, because at first, and I have questions. You still haven't answered all my questions. So I will fish for some of the answers during this. This is baiting you in so I can have you answer other questions. That was the real reason.
Now we're getting to the
Now we're getting to it. Tell us about how did you get, because I know you mentioned it in the partnership part of how you got into color. Why color? What is color? How does it work? If you can break down, and however inspired it feels.
Yeah, no, sure. Do you have to imagine? I mean, I expect you'll understand this from your lawyer days and background. PwC is, as you know, PricewaterhouseCoopers is one of the top 4 consultants globally. And I remember so I have to share this story with you. So when I was 30, I had my last holiday with my family, as in my parents and my brother. And my mum was incredibly generous. She paid for us all to go to Rajasthan in India, which was amazing. And we had this driver and a minibus, and we drove around all these amazing places. We went to the Taj Mahal on the way back, all this stuff. It was incredible. And we had Christmas out there, which was, so we didn't do Christmas presents, in the mid-sun and all this. But the thing about it was, while I was there, and I can't remember which bit of Rajasthan we were in this place, and there was a square, and there was this guy, Indian guy, sort of doing palm readings. I was like, oh, yeah, I'll have one. And he goes, you're going to create this new thing, this new way of, sort of being or sort of product or whatever, I don't know, and it was like, it's really original. And I said, oh yeah, I know what it is. I've just got this job at PwC. And he looked at me and went, no. I was like, oh, well, what does he know, Anyway, it was absolutely spot on, wasn't it at all? So it's funny, I think about that now, 20 years on, and think, yeah, you saw it, or you were aware of it to a degree. And
those gentle nudges, right? Those gentle nudges.
Yeah, the gentle nudges.
Do we pay attention to those breadcrumbs or not? Or as another soul sister calls divine breadcrumbs, as Carol's show calls it. Yeah. So you were saying, I interrupted. Yeah.
No, that's fine. And so then I think the first time when my girls were born, I had a 3-year career break with the 2 under 2 and so on. I think I went to a color conference, and I'm pretty sure it was Aurosoma, which is the other main thing in the system. And I thought, well, yeah, it's okay, but it's a bit weird. It's a bit out there. And I wasn't convinced, even though I had some great conversations. I was still in my corporate phase. And then so roll on, and it's all down to Kath, really. We were going to be running a leadership program, a 2-day one in Hertfordshire. So this is actually the nuts and bolts of it. And a friend of mine at the time had this amazing place where she lived, and she rented it out for people like us to run events. So I was saying to Kath, look, we haven't got enough people to run this event, but I don't want to let Anna down, because I know she's relying on the rental income for the place. Could we do 2 one-day creations of something? She said, yeah, Kath's very creative. So I did a soul retreat, because I've done a lot of mindfulness and stuff like that. So sort of built on some of that, and circle work and things like that. And Kath did a day on colour. And so we both went to each other's day and got other people involved. And I just remember I sort of went in with whatever issues I had on my mind. And I came out at the end of it. I still had all the same issues. And Kath, or maybe me, driving, because it was up near where I lived, driving back to our house. And I was like, felt like I was on cloud 9, anything was possible. It was all resolvable. And I couldn't understand how that could be, simply from playing with a few coloured bottles. It seemed insane. And I was hooked because I felt, the way I describe it to people is I felt lighter in myself. And so then Kath said to me, oh, have you ever thought of becoming a colour practitioner? And initially I was like, no, I've got, do appreciative inquiry, I've got NLP, I've got, an armful of qualifications. I don't need any other qualifications. That's insane. And then a friend of ours, mutual friend, was doing it, which meant I could stay at hers. And I thought, this is an opportunity that might not come again. Get over yourself. So I signed up and I didn't even know how I was going to pay for it because money wasn't exactly flowing at that point in time. And within 10 days of signing up for that, I got a contract to do some facilitation work with Hay Group, which is quite well known, for a year, which is worth about £30,000. So I was like, happy days. I solved that issue then. So that's literally the how. And I think it's what and when I signed up for it, I thought, oh, I'm doing it for my own gratification, for my own personal development. That's it. I was halfway through, and you know this because we've had these conversations, but I knew that I must have worked with colour in, a previous life or something like that. I was so into it. I loved it.
Kooky. No, I'm kidding. We've talked about that. And so real quick pause. What do you mean in terms of that? Not the mechanics of other lives. Do you mean can you elaborate on the resonance? How did it feel familiar to you? Because I think
I didn't have to learn it really. Some people go, oh, is it, I'm like, oh, it's easy, so as soon as she said, well, does anyone want to do a reading for somebody else? Like, yeah, I'll do it. And I only did half of it because half of it was mine. I assumed they didn't want to hear that bit, but I could have done the whole thing, so it's like, and halfway through, so it's like a 4-month program or something. I was like, I don't want to be looking at these all up on a website, and this is ridiculous. So I just said, look, I'm ordering a whole set. Bang, that's it, done. Send them to me. So it was like $2,500 or something. But I just knew I wanted to have them so I could play with them, and it was that, and it was sort of, and I kind of say it to people, it's such a right brain system, and that's the beauty and the magic of it. You can't quantify it. It's not like doing some sort of psychological profiling tool, which if you say, I like being in groups, you're going to say you're an extrovert. You can't make it up. So it helps people. What the colour does is it sort of works on 2 levels for me. In one way, it helps people get out of their head and connect to their soul or intuition, higher self, whatever they feel comfortable with, but that bigger piece, the expanded self. So then they're like, oh, right, oh, yeah, no, oh yeah. And then what you find as well is like there's such power in these bottles. So I was talking to someone I barely know that I met through Humans First a while ago, and had an absolute nightmare. Each time we meant to meet up, something happened. And then this person starts telling me stuff that I know they probably haven't told most people, really personal stuff. And that's why, so currently, as you may know, I'm doing quite a lot of work with men. And it's not just any men. I mean, these are men that have been abused sexually or physically, or they've suffered a really big loss, like losing their father, but they've never processed it, like when they were a kid. And so 30 years on, they're still carrying all this stuff. And that to me is what, it's like, I always wanted to work with men, but as you can imagine with colour, there's lots of women that are interested, because to me, of course, it's about the divine feminine, but it's also about the enlightened masculine. And if we don't have them both, with, I'm trying to think of a polite way of saying, but essentially it's just not going to work.
We're screwed. I'll say it, since you're such a polite Taurus.
Not always. That's it. So where is the space for the men? It's so important, and so that's the thing. And as I say, it's a really intuitive right brain system. So the complete opposite of PwC with its left brain, if you can't measure it, it doesn't exist approach.
Well, yeah. So, and that's it. There's a lot to be said about what you're sharing, because for me, I call it the soul's calling, right? And it seems like, you talked about it, that, I've worked with color in other lives, quote unquote, or in a sense it resonated with you. And I like that because it shows that you followed that calling, that whisper, that intuitive sense, that resonance, whatever you want to call it, however you want to phrase it. And then you followed play. And for me, passion is allowing the energy or the inspiration to flow through, and it guides us. And in your case, playing with your craft and allowing your intuition soul to guide you. I think that's the key for a lot of people to finding their calling, by listening and leaning in, and actually doing that. So, and I like that you mentioned qualitative, because that's very key in bringing, holistic, whole self, holistic methodologies forward, because I found, in law, in the transformational, the team facilitation space, either way, I agree with you, because I've trained in psychometrics, and I found that the quantitative needs the qualitative. We need, the bicameral, we need the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere as a whole. We need the divine feminine, the enlightened masculine as a whole. And it's really beautiful that you brought that forth. For me, one quick question, as the science geek background that I have, because well, here's how my experience for the audience with your system, well, not your system, the system of color, and the way you do it in your own unique way, or as Walt Disney says, do what you do so well that others come see you do what you do so well, and go tell other people what you do so well to come watch you do what you do so well. It's kind of a long way of saying do what you love. Walt Disney was sometimes very concise and sometimes very long-winded, apparently. God rest his soul. So my experience with you, and this is what really, on a more quantum, more metaphysical level, was you described it as I had black holes in my, and we'll call it an aura, for lack of a better description, is what spiritual calls aura. I call it a biofield. It's measurable. Qualitative, quantitative have mixed. Spiritual and science have mixed now, so we can see it holistically. And then for me, how it landed, and I wanted to ping this to you and see if I'm presenting it to the audience accurately, is I see that as a correlation to the biophysical or the DNA level, which Gene Keys is a lot about. And I'm curious if I'm accurate in saying this, that it brings back the full spectrum of the DNA, because even at DNA level, we see colors if you look at it through a proper lens. So is that an accurate perception, that also on a biophysical, metaphysical level, it helps restore your vibrance, DNA color, your aura color, whatever you want to call it?
So the way, to give you a really practical, being a tourist example, in 2018, February 2018, I broke my arm, and I've never broken a bone in my body. And all that had happened was I posted a letter from my husband through somebody's front door, turned around, thought there was one step and there were two, so I missed the step, fell over, but it didn't fall particularly badly, landed on my hands, got up, was a bit irritated, got in the car, drove home, thought, and back in those days I was training to do ultra marathons, so I haven't done a long walk for a while, so quickly get my shorts on because it's a beautiful day and hot, and march out into the middle of nowhere, and suddenly my arm is throbbing because the shock's caught up, and I can feel the pain, and I no phone signal or anything. Oh shit! Ringing my friend whose son had broken his thumb, saying, "What was the actual experience of? What was he feeling?" And thinking, "Is it the same?" Thinking, "That sounds relatively familiar." As I'm then cradling my arm because I can't extend it, thinking, I've got to get back. So ring my husband up and say, I think we need to come home. I need to go to A&E and all of the rest of it. The point of the story being, anyway, I went in, and then they're sort of making me bend the arm straight to x-ray it. So I'm crying in pain. I think it must be broken. Anyway, they found this fracture, but it was, fairly, it's a fracture as opposed to like a massive break. So the doctor said, we can put plaster on it, or you could just wear this Lancaster sling as long as you wear it. And I was like, I'd rather just have the sling because I can take that off and it's not quite so, full on. And so it's like, fine. So that was that. So sorted it all out, got some whatever I needed. And then I spoke to Melissa Jolly's the founder of Colour Mirrors, the system that I work with. I just messaged her, I said, I've broken my arm. And also actually did some other stuff. That's when I found I had osteopenia, which is the precursor to osteoporosis, which is why it had broken, I think. And Melissa said, actually you could work with any blue oil, that heals bones. So, I mean, I got everything. There was also, I've forgotten what it's called, something else that someone that, recommended. But literally, because obviously I had the sling on, I could basically rub oil into my arm. And I was told I would have to wear the sling for a minimum of 3 weeks and, whatever. And after 2 weeks, I had no pain whatsoever. And to go back, and because there was some issue with the wrist, so I'd gone to the doctor in the meanwhile. And he's like, wow, no, that's fine. I can't believe that it's healed so quickly. And within 3 weeks, I was driving a car with my mates because it was my 50th year to the Lake District, which is like 5 hours drive, sharing with someone else. We both drove up. And I tell you, that was the healing was through that blue oil. Now, for some people, that might be a bit far-fetched, but that it really does affect the physical as well as the energetic. And so I always say to people, probably your listeners will know this too, Bruce Lipton, Dr. Bruce Lipton, talks about epigenetics, doesn't he? He was the one who helped us to understand exactly, how it all works. And so it's exactly that, is that, there was the old idea was that, well, your DNA is fixed, and if you're going to get cancer or you're going to get this, it's all written in the DNA. And that's rhubarb, because we now know for a fact that you can change your DNA through how you talk to yourself, what you visualize, etc. And color's just another tool or aspect of all of that. So that can support it, because essentially what I have found, because right now, as I said earlier, because of my own journey with abuse, I now deal with a lot of clients with abuse issue, that eventually that's what comes out, and comes out relatively quickly. And the thing is any emotional trauma. So what color really helps with is to deal with suppressed, repressed, or unexpressed emotions. And some of them we know about, and some, perhaps we haven't been ready to accept, like you were talking about the victim thing, which, when you think about your gene key, the 5 line, it goes from victim to leader. And you are that leader, but you're both. And it's that kind of acceptance, and then the moving. In fact, everybody has the victim within them. It's whether we acknowledge that or not. And the wider piece then, I've lost my thread now.
It's funny because I got this download before we started, and I wrote it down. So again, you're very brilliantly on the same wavelength of the biology of belief. And I'm always reminded of the saying by Yeshua ben Yosef, Jesus of Nazareth, this notion of, and these miracles and more ye all shall do. For me, what I've come to see in terms of the metaphysics, the spiritual, what have you, that supernatural, extraordinary ability is that the belief, right, the magic, the miracle, whatever you want to call it, the color will only go as far as your belief allows, which kind of mirrors the placebo effect, because we are all creating our reality, as you alluded to earlier, and we've talked about in terms of this attraction. And I think it's key, because you can't, again, going holistic, it's not that you're doing only one thing, because I know you also have woven in other modalities, and color is the access point for you, as I use different modalities as an access point to do the soul level work that I do in the consciousness arena in that space. So there's one other thing about what you said. There's so many golden nuggets here. I love it.
Well, while you're thinking, I remember what I was talking about was,
you got it. Yeah.
Is disease, so physical illness, or dis-ease comes about because of these unexpressed, repressed, or suppressed emotions. And if you don't clear them, because you haven't dealt with them, so loss, say grief, that comes with that, it's hanging around in your, to use your term, biofield. And if you don't deal with it, it has to come out some way. So it comes out physically. And this is the point. So for example,
for the eczema, exactly.
I one of the people I didn't get to work with was a girl who was about 12, and she was having all of these pains, and it was all caused because she got chronically bullied at school. And parents were aware of what had happened, and they, dealt with the school, and the school had supported them in that. And I was like, oh yeah, and look, she's so, you know, the 3 bottle that you have, which is that lovely coral. Oh, hang on, where's my finger gone? Yeah, no.
Got to go up more. Go up more. Yeah. Move your head. Move your head. And then I think it's the one in the go up all the way. Move. Keep your fingers right there and go.
Hang on, let me do it. This. Where the blooming hell? Right there.
Right
We
there.
are.
Okay. All right. Hey, stop right there. That's it. In the middle. Right there. Stop. Kind of above your finger in the middle. Everybody. That's coral. For those that were colorblind like me, because I think that's pink, and she goes, "No, that's coral." I go, "That's pink, Kate." So you have helped me be less colorblind or be more.
That's fantastic. Anyway, so the coral one is, if people have that in their, either in their soul, their color DNA blueprint, or the shadow as you have it in your shadow, you're more likely to get bullied because it's kind of low self-esteem. And this particular individual had it in their birthday or their, you know, their sort of colored DNA blueprint. So I was like, oh, really? Probably if she just bathes in this bottle, it will be fine. You know, it's about that shift. But because they were so science oriented, and it didn't matter how I tried to describe it, and things just started to get worse and worse. They ended up with a thyroid problem and all sorts of other things, going to Great Ormond Street. And I'm like, this could be nipped in the bud. But because of your own set of beliefs and of what you think is possible, you know, they even got to the point saying, yeah, I'm coming for a session, and then they withdrew and they never came back. So I left it, you know, because at the end of the day, it's everyone's choice and journey. And it was so sad because it was actually a really easily resolved issue, really, on that level.
Well, I like that because you said the color helps you feel lighter within, and I equate it to the mind is what keeps the emotions trapped, right? The willpower or the focus, where our focus goes, the energy goes. So I call it mentalizing. There's so much energy, chi, prana, thought energy, beliefs, whatever you want to call it. So much of our awareness and energy is here that we're neglecting, as you've illustrated so brilliantly, where the energies or emotions are trapped. They're no longer in motion. They're no longer emotions. They're trapped, suppressed, repressed. What was it? Unexpressed? I love the way you say that.
Suppressed and unexpressed emotions.
Trademark pending. No, I think that's too descriptive. I got to check with my friends at the WIPO on that one. So my point, no legal advice is being dispensed here or healing advice for that matter. Please consult a legal professional and or a medical professional. And until you sign a fee agreement with both of us, we are not your healer. So no, I'm teasing everybody. So the other aspect of that is because you talked about it, and I wanted to make sure that the audience kind of had that elaborated, is because you do, you know, everybody has this DNA blueprint or color blueprint. I call it the soul blueprint, is, you know, in human design, which is another modern qualitative, quantitative tool. They talk about you're designed a certain way. You're the divine God, universe, the algorithm, if you're atheist or what have you. It designed you a certain way. There's a method to the proverbial cosmic madness. And so you're talking about, you have a front line, which you call the DNA blueprint, and then you have another line of colors.
So if you talk about, you know, Jung, Jung's work, so he talks about shadow work, doesn't he?
Mm-hmm.
So the second line is like the shadow, the bits we don't necessarily want to see or we can't see sometimes, and depending on the individual, some people, so it's really interesting. I was in a conversation with someone recently, and they were resonating with all of their shadow bottles and not owning their front line stuff. It depends, you know, it depends where we are, but you have both of those, if you like, at the third dimensional level. And how that works is Goethe, if you remember him, he designed this thing called the color wheel, which said which color was complementary to which color. So coral and turquoise are complementary colors, i.e. opposite each other. Yes. Yellow and violet are opposite each other, red and green, and so
Roy
on.
G. Biv. That's how I remember it. Roy G. Biv. Red.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Yeah, Roy G. Biv.
So that, anyway, so that's how that works. And so that's how we work out what sits behind. And then this is the really cool, and this is why I love it. So one of my first clients was an artist who's reasonably well known in the UK, and she's openly admits that she is bipolar. And she found color really helpful. And she said, yeah, I've done, you know, mindfulness, I've done all these different kind of things, but I love color because it's so positive. Because ultimately it's saying there's nothing wrong with you. you know, there may be some tweaks that are needed, or, and then to get to the third line is essentially your kind of fourth, fifth, seventh dimensional, you know, what's the promise? Where are you going?
Wait a second, you've been holding out. There's a third line you haven't told me about. I knew there was a tricky side to you like me. That's it. I knew it. That's it. The third line you've been on. So you were saying, so seventh, so more of your higher dimensional essence. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So basically it's sort of like, this is who you are when you've got it all sort of, it's all cooking on gas really. And we're more at that fifth dimensional level, or, you know, whatever you want to call it, that higher self is in, you know, the ego subliminated, whatever works for the audience or the person. And that's where we're going. So once we've worked through all this crud, that's the ultimate. And then, you know, as part of the so those are the building blocks, if you like. So I always say to people, 6 sessions, we go through that and then you're done. But there's also what I always do is, as you know, I'm not going to do it now, but just to show people that I have my color cards, which are like oracle cards. They look like this, the macabre on the front. And when I'm doing a session online with somebody, I take the cards out, as we did, you know, before we came on tonight. Right, what's the energy? Right, but obviously when I'm working with an individual, it's okay, what's going on for Hass right now? And then I'll pick 2, 3, 4 cards depending, and I tune in and I get the bottles or the spritzers that are related. So as well as the bottles behind us, we've got, whoop, let me just get one, these sorts of spritzers, you know, which are the like the perfumes. And then that gives, it's like a litmus test, you know, like sort of like, okay, so what where are they in their emotional field? So it's really helpful because there's one called Blue Angel, and that always comes up, or often comes up with new clients who are a bit afraid. You know, like, what's going to happen? Is it some kind of weirdo witch thing or whatever it is that they're thinking? And so I know that I need to make it even more safe if that comes up, you know, and go even slower because they're still wrestling with all of that stuff. And the classic, I had one client who was a friend, you know, a few years ago, and the first 3 sessions, and they were face to face when we did a lot more of that, you know, she was shuffling cards each time she got Blue Angel. And it was so funny because the first time she bought all these bottles and bought the book, and then she said, oh no, about 2 weeks later, I need to return all the bottles to you because I've got dermatitis and I can't, you know, work with these. And I said, no, look, I've got other clients with dermatitis and they've been fine with it. That's nonsense, because all that's in there is water and avocado oil and natural vegetable dyes and a few essential oils. There's nothing in there that is going to react to your skin. You'll be safe, you're fine with it. No, I've got to turn this. I'm like, okay, fine, we can do the work, but it's going to be really hard, because the whole point, and this is the real distinction. So when people are doing like a therapy session or a coaching session, it's by and large, unless it's hands-on, it's auditory, isn't it? You know, it's a conversation. But with color, you've got the visual cue, the auditory piece, obviously. It's also kinesthetic because you can hold and work with the bottle. You can meditate with a spritzer or a bottle and really connect to the energies. And then it's olfactory. So it's working on all of those 4 aspects, which is what makes it so powerful. And the other thing is, so you have a session, which is largely a conversation. The client then takes 1 or more bottles to then go and work with in between. And that's how they integrate what they've learned. So then it comes back to this piece that you mentioned earlier, but we talked about embodiment. That's how we embody it. So, you know, like if you read a really good book, you go, oh yeah, that was a great idea. And I love this, love this. Oh, look, my cousin's over there. And then suddenly your attention is drawn to something else. And you forget that wonderful book because you're stuck in the drama of whatever is emerging in front of you. You see, with the color, because you've bathed in a bottle and you know, a bit like we set an intention before coming on here, you set an intention, then you get in the bath, you have the bath, then you pay attention to your dreams, which is just your subconscious programming coming up for clearing. And we can talk about all of that and all these things. And then it's like you really are healed because you've shifted. And just as you know, and we all know the way that cells work, that within a matter of hours or days, cells are shifting out, so we're not the same person. But it's the same thing, because you've had the bath, it's targeting the cells and bringing all that good energy in, and also removing those bits of fear or limiting beliefs or whatever. So you have really shifted.
Yeah, I love that. So there's a lot of gold there because it goes back to that embracing the full spectrum, or what you call the front line. We talked about it in many different facets. It's the blind spot and the gift, right? The shadow, the second line and the first line. And then the third line, which you've been holding out for me, is this notion of the whole spectrum of beingness must be embraced. And I like that because there's this notion of, like you're alluding to, that we get to the core. For instance, the dermatitis, right? The issue is not the issue, it's how we're relating to it. So it's this funny dance ontologically of, if you had the issue, you're going to respond to the color a certain way, right? You're going to relate to the color a certain way. And it's all about coming back to that wholeness, not judging the reaction. Is how do I relate? If you relate back to the intro, this notion of accepting, having perseverance, having capacity, healing happens automatically, as we've talked about with Tanya and other episodes.
Yeah.
So there's this notion of that the color allows for you to bring about that wholeness, or that wholing, as I've often toyed with it in the past, of once you embrace all of your color, all that vitality within, you actually trigger all the cellular stuff, all this healing happens. And a lot of it is releasing and bringing in. And it's very alchemical, right? Because I always talk about it as you got to dissolve, you got to banish or get rid of the old energies in order to bring in the new energies. And it's really beautiful how you've described it. So what do you want your legacy to be when you leave this plane? What do you want Katie Poo to be known for or remembered by?
So for me, it's not, I have nothing for myself. Like, I want this for me. I think what I would love is, you know how now everybody talks about mindfulness. Oh, it's great. And not to knock it, it has a role to play. And that came about because of the amazing work that people like John Kabat-Zinn and other people did back in the 90s and early noughties. And did it in a way, even like, I mean, I can't bear Ken Wilber's work because it's so dense and hard to get into. But essentially, he was writing at a time when people didn't really understand consciousness, so he had to use words longer than marmalade and make it really complex to get it, accepted. Unfortunately, we've moved beyond that point now. And I feel what I really, really love is for colour to be accepted completely as a tool in, the panoply of healing that's available, and people go, yeah, I'm going to choose that, and it's absolutely an accepted part, like mindfulness is, and whatever is required. So you and I have joked about it, but and certainly when I did what's her name, Lynn, the Power of Eight woman, Lynn McTaggart, I think it is, talks about setting up intention circles, and we had one for our Colour Mirrors organization as after a conference, and some of us kept meeting, and one of the intentions that we held space for on a regular basis was for an institute of colour. And I would love for that to be there, and in that place it would be, it could be people come for specific things they want to get healing, or for workshops and stuff like that, but there would also be a scientific piece, because as you spoke to so well and integrate so well on your show, actually we need both. It's not about let's go and do the woo-woo stuff, but how do we make sense of that and break it down and show that actually it does do what all these other things do in its own particular way. So I think if we could get to a point where the money was found and that it happened, and then, people could see. And so then it would be just like, well, now you have a choice. You can go conventional medicine, you can go, especially as we talk now. And I've had a few conversations recently, especially people close to me about, I can't wait for the COVID vaccine to come. And I said, well, I could wait a million years, frankly. I'm not going there. And well, why not? Why not? This is going to save everybody. And I'm like, so, it's that. I'd like something that offers an alternative and that people felt was safe and they could understand how it works, you know, because there's enough evidence for them, because I understand it's a bit like doubting Thomas at the moment, you know, well, prove to me it works, you know, I want to see the holes in your side, Jesus.
Well, there's
you
a
know.
problem. Yeah. I mean, because then you have that disbelief, which then curbs the ability to heal oneself because you're in the mind ontologically,
Yeah.
rolling and toiling in your mind, not allowing the energies to go into the body. And that's where the magic is. The cauldron, as I call it, the cauldron of God's alchemy is the body. Embodiment, as you alluded to, is where the cells integrate from the soul level, mind, heart, then gets biophysically either neurocardiology, you know, neurobiology, neurocardiology, you know, the cellular metabolism. So it's really brilliant. So to sum it up, you want to explode and bring color to the world. You want to bring an explosion of color to the world. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I think that would be a very fair statement.
I love it. I love it. And I feel you're already doing it because you're bringing color to my world and to the world of many, many people I know. So what's the quote you want to leave everybody with? What's an inspired quote or a funny quote or a quote that, you know, it comes from you, however you want to leave it?
Right. Well, so it's not a quote as such, but it's something that really, it was funny. I was writing to the person who I got it from today about something else. And I said to them, I just want to thank you because your work inspired me. And it's not somebody famous like, you know, Deepak or whatever. It's
Like Hass Sadeghi.
No. This is, you know, they're well known in the world of the color. And I read her book, and I can't remember the context of it, but she was sort of giving some suggestions for dealing with this particular, it's about prosperity and this particular issue. And one of the things she said is, you know, I choose to add value in every conversation I have. And it really resonated with me because it goes back to your point from early on in the conversation, asked about service, you know, what's your view on service? And for me, it's that, you know, it's like I get into, so today I was having a chat with someone who I don't know that well. And, you know, as I say, it had been quite difficult getting to having the conversation. And even today they were 15 minutes late because they got the time zones wrong. And, you know, I'm like, really, what is going on here? But I laughed and, you know, we're chatting away. And then I said, oh, it sounds to me like you've got loads going on in your world right now. You know, to the point of like, you know, anxiety or whatever. Well, yeah, actually, I'm about to launch my business and move house. I'm like, yeah, well, that's pretty full on, isn't it? And so we were laughing about it. And then I said, well, you know, how can I help you? Or, you know, what's going on for you right now? And they're like, well, you know, I really, you know, the thing is I have to find the energy, shouldn't use these words, but it was like the energy to do social media, and because otherwise how am I going to get myself out there? And I said, well, there's a limiting belief if ever I saw one. I mean, it's not about what you put on social media. You are your business and you've got this amazing energy. You don't need social media. If you choose to go to social media, that's fine, but don't feel obligated. Anyway, we're chatting away about this. Anyway, I've got this, so that was first thing. And then it was like, well, I've got my podcast and I need to monetize my podcast and I need to do, I said, okay, well, let's take that. Okay. And then I started to tell her about this platform that I've looked at for myself. And I said, and this is why it's called this, and got into the nomenclature, if you like, of what it meant. And I said, this is how it works. And this is how you could do it. And you could do this. And then you'd have a membership group, society, and, you know, I said, oh, wow, that's amazing. Wow, I've just looked it up. Oh, that looks really good. And I said, well, there you go. And she goes, yeah, you've really added value there. And I said, yeah, that's what I do, you know, because to me, whether or not she takes that on or she doesn't take it on, it's her choice. And I feel it's always possible to add something to somebody else. If we can, you never know where it's going to come back, you know, or if it's going to come back. It's not even for that. We're doing it in service of the other. And I think what it comes back to, actually, Hass, as I warm up into this comment, is when I remember, and I don't, you know, remember every morning, but it's like, you know, getting up, so starting the day, going through the spiritual practices and stuff. And I sort of say to the universe, right, well, how can I be of service to you today? And if we ask with really intentionally, then actually what happens is the universe says back to us, well, how can I be of service to you, Hass, Kate, whoever, and it all just comes back, because that's how it works in a funny kind of way.
That which you believe, you conceive, or I believe it's a famous Sufi mystic who said that the universe is like one big dome that echoes back to us that which we emit out. And so that is a very beautiful way of describing one of the fundamental universal laws of cause and effect, of that which you plant and sow out into the field, you harvest later. That is the nature of reality, and the consciousness behind that is very, very powerful. Well, Kate, this has definitely been a colorful experience, and I've uncovered your secret third line. and it's funny because the camera froze as you laughed. I made you burst, that the energy literally froze. I love it. I love it. I am a catalyst of divine laughter, amongst other things. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your color with the world. Any parting words before we wrap up today?
I've got one thing, actually, as you were saying that thing on the Sufi piece. So that when I was working with Cass, we developed a program for young people called Colour Rocks, and each one had a mantra. And the last one, which is all about divine love, really, but how do you define love? And the mantra was, as I believe, so I see. And that's what we taught to them, as the final sort of piece of the wisdom that we left them with, because it's all about building resilience, emotional resilience in young people, so that they can go out there and be the leaders of tomorrow. So I thought, I'll share that with you as we.
I love it. Your leadership will only extend as far as you believe it will, and then you can sit back and see it will. And that's the power of divine will, ladies and gentlemen. So thank you, Kate, for being here. Thank you for sitting and experiencing the alchemy, the color, and the very powerful transformative shares from Kate. As always, we've appreciated your presence, and we'll catch you next time on the Vulnerable Power Show, a deep dive into the heart of, in this case, colorful leadership. Thank you all, and have a blessed day.